Hi, everyone. I'm Amelia Robinson, the Columbus Dispatch's Opinion and Community Engagement Editor. Welcome to Columbus Conversations. What is the future of abortion in Ohio? The U.S. Supreme Court recently overturned Roe v. Wade, ruling that women do not have a constitutional right to abortion. Here in the Buckeye State, the so called heartbeat law is in effect, essentially banning abortions after 6 weeks of pregnancy. We will discuss what this all means to Ohio with tonight's panel. This topic is, of course, of great interest to this community and all of the nation. And I've already received a ton of questions from readers. But as always during these talks, you are welcome to submit your questions to panelists in the Facebook chat. I'm going to get to as many of those questions as I can. This event is part of the Dispatch's commitment to serving Columbus, Central Ohio, and the rest of Ohio. Support local journalism like this by subscribing to the Dispatch at dispatch.com/subscribe now. A recap of tonight's discussion will be used in the Sunday conversation section and the Dispatch and posted to dispatch.com with videos from tonight as well. Now I'm going to introduce our panelists. We have Allie Frazier, who is Executive Director of Right to Life of Northeast Ohio. She is filling in for Mike Ganadakis, who is President of Ohio Right to Life, and he could not be here today. We have Dr. Allison Norris, who is co-principal investigator of Ohio Policy Evaluation Network, OPEN, and she's also an associate professor in the Ohio State University College of Public Health. We have Kelly Copland, who is executive director of Pro-Choice Ohio. We have Desiree Timms, who is president and CEO of Innovation Ohio. We have Rep. Allison Russo, who is the Ohio Minority Leader. We have Jesse Balmer, who is from USA Today, Ohio Bureau. And we have Cindy Boston, who is Vice President of Heartbeat International. We're going to start tonight with Jesse, who has been covering abortion for the Dispatch and other newspapers in the USA Today Ohio network for 1 billion years. So she's maybe not a billion years, but for a long time. Jesse, can you give us an update about what is actually going on with abortion in Ohio?
Yeah, certainly, Amelia. I think you hit some of the high points in your initial comments, but Roe v. Wade was overturned in a case, Dobbs versus Women's Health. It was a Mississippi case that was looking at whether abortion could be banned after 15 weeks into pregnancy. But the U.S. Supreme Court, in a 6-3 decision, decided to go a step further and overturn Roe v. Wade and Casey versus Planned Parenthood, which were really the landmark abortion decisions in the United States. And what they said is they're sending this back to the states. And in the state of Ohio, Republicans control both chambers of the Ohio House and Senate. They actually have what's called a supermajority. So it's a veto-proof majority. Essentially, they can pass what they want. And what they've wanted in recent years has been restrictions on abortion access, whether that be bans, whether that be bans on specific procedures, whether that be kind of hurdles or requirements like variances for clinics. And so shortly after that decision came down from the U.S. Supreme Court, just hours later, a federal court lifted Ohio's stay on what had been called by supporters the heartbeat bill, essentially bans abortion about 6 weeks into a pregnancy, which in a lot of instances is before someone might realize they're pregnant, if you think about just how periods work. So also in some court paperwork, they said that was about 1% to 1.5% of abortions that were performed at clinics across Ohio. So really very few abortions were being performed that early. And so that was what happened last week. A number of clinics went to the Ohio Supreme Court trying to argue there that there is a state constitutional right to abortion, that the state constitution goes above and beyond what the U.S. Constitution does as far as access to medical decisions and medical privacy. The Ohio Supreme Court on Friday denied an emergency stay, which essentially means the 6-week ban is going to be law for the foreseeable future. That case is still open, so they're still looking at arguments on it and we'll see what happens there.
So with all that said, what is the future of abortion in Ohio, and where would you like it to see it go?
Thanks so much, Amelia, for that question and for framing this panel today, bringing all of us together. These are questions that are very, very important to Ohioans, and what's happened has happened rather suddenly, although the path to get here today has been long. There were 11 more abortion clinics in Ohio 10 years ago than there are today, and about 20 pieces of legislation that restrict access to abortion had been passed over that time. So however, abortion had never been banned at 6 weeks, which is what suddenly came down upon the state. And this was mentioned already, but about 3/4 of people who have had an abortion in Ohio in the recent past had it after 6 weeks. And so since just a few days ago, 75% of people who would need an abortion and going forward would be turned away. And that path has been determined for them by other people, not by their own choice about what they want to do. And my research group has looked at the burdens that come upon people who aren't able to obtain an abortion in the place where they live. Some people will travel. We estimate that they'll travel 7 times further, from an average of 26 miles to an average of 157 miles to get to a clinic in another state. So we can talk more about what that travel burden means. And then lots of people will have a birth that they didn't want to have. And we can talk more about what that impact means for the 20,000 people in Ohio who have an abortion, who were having abortions each year prior to this change.
Now, Cindy, I think you were going to say something before. What do you want to see happen next?
Well, I'd love to see Ohio continue to foster growth within the systems that are already there. We have some great programs already in Ohio, and to move to the place where women have more information, more support, long-term care. I think those are the types of things that Heartbeat International and our pregnancy help centers are looking for. We're very interested in making sure that no woman feels so alone that abortion is our only option. We're really interested in making sure that women have what they need so that they can feel supported, they feel cared about, they feel like they can move forward with their pregnancies.
So one of the stories that's been in the news lately, just over the weekend, we broke a story about a 10-year-old girl who went to Indiana to seek an abortion. Dave Celebrezzi, a reader, wants to know what should happen in cases of children who are pregnant and also rape and incest survivors.
So, Amelia, I will jump in and say this. I mean, I think the case that you're talking about, and we unfortunately, I think we'll begin to hear many more cases like this, was a 10-year-old girl who was sexually abused, discovered that she was pregnant by her rapist. And because that discovery happened at 6 weeks and 2 days, was forced with the decision to go across state lines to seek an abortion, because otherwise the state of Ohio and the existence of the 6-week abortion ban would force this 10-year-old child into childbirth, which to me is quite barbaric. And I think anyone who has heard this case, and again, there will be many more cases like this, is horrified. And this is just an example of how extreme these pieces of legislation are for women and for girls. And this is very out of touch with where most Americans are on this issue. And specifically Ohioans, we know that more than 60% of Ohioans support the protections that were in place because of Roe. And we're just going to see more horrifying cases like this as time goes on. And I think also we're going to see more extremism in the legislature getting more and more restrictive. We already have some legislators openly discussing, banning some forms of contraception. And this is just completely out of touch with where most Ohioans and their families are. And this is an attack on fundamental freedoms to make these important healthcare decisions.
Now, Allie, what do you, from your perspective, what would happen in the case of a 10-year-old girl who was pregnant due to a rape, and now she's pregnant?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when I saw that article had come out about this child who had been so horribly treated by someone close to her, I would assume a lot of times that's what happens in these tragic cases. I was left with so many questions. I think one of the biggest questions I had was the article seemed somewhat devoid of describing what had happened to her abuser, if legal action had been taken, and that sort of thing, and that left me concerned. And I understand that since this victim was really young, that kind of probably played into what truly could be shared safely about her and about this situation that is so heartbreaking. And my heart just went out to this girl, truly this girl who had been, absolutely failed by this system. And to be honest, my heart was broken because I know that sexual assault is one of the most deeply personal and painful things that a person can experience, especially as a woman. And I think part of what broke my heart so much is I saw a lot of pro-abortion sources and people who would lean more toward the pro-choice side using this girl's story as cover to push their agenda. And that didn't set right with me at all. That honestly just broke my heart in pieces. The pro-life movement, our view on these incredibly heartbreaking cases is that abortion creates a new victim and abortion perpetuates the violence that is leveled against innocent victims. And that is truly how we feel. This young girl deserves every single bit of emotional, medical, and spiritual support that she can possibly get. But my heart also breaks for her because I know that ultimately at some point this way that she has been horribly hurt, abortion is an extension of that now too. She not only is going to, have to move on in her life and deal with the fact that something so horrible has been perpetuated against her, but now she's also going to have to carry the knowledge as well, that abortion was part of that story as well. And these are not easy conversations. They never are, and they should never be handled lightly. And it breaks my heart that we have to deal with these sorts of things anyway. And I will say our organization is very much looking into legislation that would punish people who commit sexual assault against others in a more specific way. We believe that both mom and baby in that scenario have been horribly victimized. And the question now is, how do we move forward in a way that's nonviolent? How do we provide all the support possible? How do we heal with love? And that is always the question. And looking forward, it breaks my heart how abortion just perpetuates this cycle of violence. And to be honest, just my heart was deeply grieved by what that young lady had been subjected to.
If I may, all of that concern is cold comfort to someone who has been sexually assaulted and is faced with a pregnancy as a result of that. And to be frank, I object to the categorization that anyone used that as cover. We warned legislators that this would happen. Anti-choice legislators proceeded with all of these bans anyway. So this is the agenda that they passed, and these are the results of that agenda. And I want to say very clearly that any reason a person chooses to have an abortion is a good reason. I trust people to make their own medical decisions. And I want to be very clear to everyone watching who has had an abortion, who may need an abortion, who is pregnant, and is concerned about whether or not they will get treatment that they may need if there's a complication. I want you to know that we at Pro-Choice Ohio, Ohio's abortion funds, Ohio's abortion providers, and medical organizations across the state, we support you. We will never stop working to make sure that you can get the health care, and abortion is health care, that you can get that locally without having to cross state borders, that you can get that without having to justify it to anyone, without political interference, without stigma, without financial barriers, and without delays. People are being forced to seek care out of state. Some people will self-manage their abortions and face potentially criminalization. That should never happen. Not in Ohio, not in any state in this country. That is a fundamental human rights abuse. And it's not something that is something that is consistent with Ohio values. This is something that is an extreme agenda, and it is the only reason that it's been allowed to go into effect is because the state house has been so severely gerrymandered that we have this manufactured anti-choice majority in the legislature who is imposing their view on the citizens of Ohio.
Now, here's another question that's somewhat related, but not so much. A reader named Letitia wants to know how would people who have tubal pregnancies and other sort of issues, how would they be impacted? Would they be allowed to have abortions under this law, or how would their medical condition be handled?
I can definitely speak to that for sure. I think there's been a lot of confusion recently about kind of the difference between an abortion and miscarriage care or treatment in cases of an ectopic pregnancy. I've seen a lot of things kind of floating around that have been confusing. After miscarriage care and treatment for ectopic pregnancies are protected in Ohio. And I think it's really important to be clear about that because these situations can be life-threatening for women, and I think that's important. I think one of the concerns has kind of stemmed from the idea that in a lot of medical literature, abortion is, typically refers to like termination of a pregnancy, but there's a difference between like an elective abortion and then what the medical community would call a spontaneous abortion, which is a miscarriage. So I think that that's where part of that concern had come from. But to be very, very clear, Ohio law and pro-life legislation is incredibly clear that women who need miscarriage care and women that are seeking care for ectopic pregnancies, their care is protected under Ohio law and their care is protected under pro-life legislation. So I definitely want to be clear about that because I've seen a lot of misinformation about that lately.
I just want to add to the person who made the comment, Letitia, this is a real fear because what we're seeing and what we're hearing from extreme MAGA Republicans in the state house who are trying to push an agenda that includes banning abortion in all situations. Right now, we're hearing and reading stories about children who are being raped, who are being forced to either give birth or to find money and access from a person of legal driving age to drive them across state lines to access abortion care. The extremism is very very real. And we need to be very fearful of the extreme Republican agenda that is pushing through legislation and policies that will not save us, will not protect us. And the only way out is to vote them out.
I'd like to contribute another piece of clarification, scientific information about what happens to people who are denied an abortion when they want one. There's great evidence. It's tragic findings, but people who are denied an abortion that they want, they have financial consequences. They're more likely to be economically insecure for years later. They're likely to have poor health for years later. The children that they already have are likely to fail to meet their developmental milestones as compared to women who are able to have abortions when they want them. They're women who are forced or who are unable to have an abortion when they need it, suffer greater exposure to violence from an intimate partner. So I agree that we want state resources to be in place to support the well-being of people who have children and people who live in our state across all of these things, financial well-being and protection from intimate partner violence. And by providing people with abortions when they need them, we help folks to achieve their life goals. And by denying them, we set them back. That is in the that evidence is true. It doesn't depend on what people believe to be true. That evidence is what has actually manifest in people's lives.
Now, Reverend Russo, you want to add something?
Yeah, I do want to push back a little bit on this issue of specificity and the language of not only the 6-week abortion ban that I actually sat through, dozens of hours in the hearing. I was in the legislature. It was one of the first abortion bans that I ever heard and listened to. The problem with many of these pieces of legislation is that the language is very vague and it is not based in actual medical science, and it does not represent what actually happens within the delivery of healthcare and how complicated, particularly women's health and during pregnancy, that care can become. And, the reader had a question about ectopic pregnancy. And the reality is I am already hearing from OBGYNs who are practicing right now and having to make decisions about how quickly they respond to these situations when they see them in their practice, because the reality is the language is very vague. It opens up all kinds of opportunity to criminalize what is actual legitimate healthcare. And we have now situations where providers are having to wait until the last minute when a woman's life is truly in danger. And by the way, all ectopic pregnancies end in none of them are viable pregnancies. And so that is the reality of what clinicians are facing already with the implementation of the 6-week abortion ban. And we will continue to hear more stories about this. This is very dangerous for women in the state of Ohio.
Now, see, this is another topic I want to bring up that I've received a couple questions about, and that is contraception. Ohioans are stocking up on Plan B, and some people are considering sterilization. And reader Diana Reed wants to know, should the state intervene to restrict access to birth control, or should the state put into place things that allow for birth control?
I think it's very scary that we're seeing bills being introduced and talked about in a way that would really lean into banning birth control. We're talking IUDs. We're talking about birth control pills. A lot of this legislation being drafted by outsiders and pushed by men who don't understand how menstrual cycle works, right? They don't understand why people are on birth control. They have no idea. They are just concerned with their MAGA extreme agenda. And so it is going to have real effects. And I do think we need to pay attention to the language, as Leader Russo so eloquently talked about, that is being implemented into these bills. Pay attention to the hearings, pay attention to what they're saying, because when we get into talking about the criminalization of it all, I don't know how many licensed physicians are going to risk their medical license on, offering that care, because there's a real fear of losing their medical license and their ability to practice and save lives. And that's what this is about. It's about how many lives are we going to be able to save and how many people are going to be criminalized for leaning into that.
I will just add to that as well that we have House Democrats and Senate Democrats who have introduced Joint Resolution 5, House Joint Resolution 5, that will actually put in place the right not only to protect the rights that were afforded under Roe versus Wade, but also the right to access contraceptives in all of their forms. I believe very strongly that this is access to fundamental health care for individuals to make decisions about their reproductive health and their reproductive futures. And absolutely, we are seeing already conversations from legislators pretty openly talking about being open to banning forms of contraception. Again, this is completely out of touch with where the vast majority of Ohioans are on this issue, and particularly as it relates to women's health care.
Well, now, Cindy or Allie, do you guys have any thoughts on this at all?
Yeah, I do. And to circle back to the issue of ectopic pregnancies as well, because I feel like with this, it's really important to be clear because women are experiencing these medical emergencies now. And I never ever want a woman to be confused by any rhetoric regarding ectopic pregnancies, or a medical provider for that matter. In Ohio Revised Code section 5106.15, it does include, it says, nothing in this section denies reimbursement for drugs or devices to prevent implantation of the fertilized ovum. So I do believe that that is regarding to birth control. And then, or this is specifically in regards to the ectopic pregnancies point, or for medical procedures for the termination of an ectopic pregnancy. So clarity, I think, is really important, as ectopic pregnancies can be dangerous. And I want to make sure that medical practitioners and women who are experiencing these heartbreaking situations are aware that Ohio Revised Code does protect them. It is extremely clear about what is allowed under Ohio Revised Code, how women are protected, how doctors are protected as well. So I want to be really, really clear about that. And then in terms of birth control, I think if you look at Dobbs, which is kind of in some ways the catalyst of everything that's happening here, if you look at Dobbs, the majority opinion is very clear that this ruling does not impact at all previous rulings by the Supreme Court on birth control. In the majority opinion, they make a firm delineation between birth control and between abortion, and they focus on Dobbs only pertaining to that. And to be honest, I think that it's important to be clear about this, because I think that the scare tactic of telling women that birth control is going to be banned, I think can be a little bit of a red herring. Because I think what we're talking about here, when we're talking about abortion specifically, is how do Ohioans feel about intentionally suffocating, dismembering, or poisoning a known pregnancy intentionally. And I think when we're talking about abortion, that's what we're talking about. And I think that it's helpful too to know that before Dobbs, more than half of the states in the United States had laws that challenged Roe. There is not, to my knowledge, any state that has challenged the Supreme Court's opinion on birth control. There could be one out there. I'm not aware of it. But I think it is important too to be clear about where Ohioans stand on this, and that abortion is the intentional ending of an innocent human life.
Amelia, may I speak to the dangers of pregnancy?
Sure.
So we've been talking about ectopic pregnancy, which is a pregnancy outside the uterus. And of course, if not removed, it can be life-threatening. Pregnancy at all places inside the uterus also can be life-threatening. There's a shocking statistic that in Ohio, if there's a total abortion ban, which I believe that if there's a 6-week ban and the supermajority of people who wish to ban abortion, we are looking at a total abortion ban as a real possibility in the state. And were that to happen, we would see in the state a 14% increase in maternal deaths each year. It is that the reason for that is it is much more dangerous to give birth than to have an abortion. Lots of people don't have good information about that, but it's very, very well established. In fact, it's 14 times riskier for dying if a person has a full-term delivery than if they have an abortion. Abortion is very safe. And so banning abortion increases people's risk of dying when they become pregnant. And these risks are not borne equally. They are borne more heavily by Black women in Ohio, who already are at higher risk of maternal death. And beyond death, there's all kinds of health consequences from giving birth and staying pregnant to the end of the pregnancy that are also borne unequally by people across the state. And so to brush aside the safety concerns of pregnant people and require them to either travel out of the state to have an abortion or require them to have a birth, it's cruel. And as a public health scientist, I can't stand by and see the ground of caring and concern to take care. I am concerned and I care for our friends and our neighbors and ourselves. We people who can become pregnant and the consequences we will experience if we have to travel for abortion or if we're forced to carry a pregnancy to term.
And Amelia, if I could jump in on that contraception piece too. I don't really care what the Dobbs decision says on that. I care about what I have seen in my 20 years of lobbying at the State House in Ohio. And they have defunded Planned Parenthood and other family planning centers. 38 of Ohio's 88 counties don't have a family planning center that provides contraception for low-income Ohioans. Time and again, we have tried to pass measures that would require hospitals to provide information and access to survivors of incest and rape, information and access to emergency contraception, Plan B. Those things have never passed the Ohio legislature. And we all saw, in a very high-profile way, Hobby Lobby and other employers fight the Affordable Care Act, specifically the provision that requires contraceptives to be covered. There is an agenda to eliminate access to contraception. I don't care what anyone says. I look at what they've done. I look at the record, and the record is clear. You cannot rely on what people are saying about the future of access to contraception.
So this is a related question. It's from Mary Jo of Columbus. She wants to know, why is there a lack of accountability for fathers? She actually said something kind of funny. These are not immaculate conceptions. Would there ever be a mandatory reversible vasectomy for everyone 18 years of age? In other words, are there any sort of things that require men to be more responsible, or any sort of restrictions on males?
I can hop in super quick. I would love for guys to man up. I think that would be awesome. I think legislation that is focused on responsibility. I know people have floated around the ideas of maybe having men providing, their paternity essentially in terms of child support at conception. And I think a lot of times that's kind of floated as almost like a joke. The pro-life movement is absolutely on board with that. I think that a lot of times women are really victimized by kind of this culture that allows men to get off scot-free. The bottom line is, as women, we can't walk away from pregnancy as easily as men can, because we're built differently. And that puts a lot more pressure on us as women to make decisions in our personal lives and to, take care of our children. And so I think that, stuff like requiring men to, pay their child support at conception, I think that would be something to talk about. As far as I'm concerned, having men be more responsible, I think that's a net positive for all of us, regardless of how we feel on this issue. And to just very quickly circle back, because I know we're short on time, but to circle back on the issue about women who are dying because of maternal health issues, I think this is something that both sides can get behind in terms of putting in the work to make sure that our maternal death rate is lower and to protect women. I think abortion a lot of times gets kind of pushed as a Band-Aid. Let's work together to lower these maternal health statistics. And everyone knows that Ohio's infant mortality statistics are abysmal. Let's work together. I'm down for that. I just spoke at a memorial service for 2 women up in Cleveland who were killed by illegal abortions. Like, these things, it's hard to be a woman. Things are dangerous. But we want to make sure that women are safe. And, I don't believe that abortion is ultimately going to be a solution to that. So as far as fighting, maternal mortality and infant mortality, absolutely. Let's find some life-affirming solutions and let's remove the need at all.
Amelia? I just wanted to let you know that, pregnancy help centers throughout the state, we have 183 of them. They are doing the good work. They are volunteers and staff supported by their local communities, and they are the ones that are helping with fathers. They're providing fatherhood classes. They're providing the support. We know in crisis that the one thing that makes a big difference is another person. And a lot of centers within the Ohio state are actually providing men to mentor men, fathers to mentor expectant fathers. There's a strong connection between that. I've been working with women with unplanned pregnancy and crisis pregnancies and the concern that they have for 27 years, both in Ohio and Missouri. And I can tell you one thing, that if the young man feels like he can come alongside her and feel supported, that makes a big difference. So that's what pregnancy help centers are doing to help bring real change in family life, in how they see themselves, their abilities. I've had young couples that have gone on to have amazing careers. They chose to continue the pregnancy. They chose to attend our mentoring classes, life coaching classes. They chose to listen to those in their community who were volunteering their time, who were donating their time to come in and come alongside them. And it made a complete difference. They finish college, they get good careers, they step out into the marketplace, and then they can also parent their children and enjoy life as a family. Those things really make a big difference for fathers from the pregnancy help community. And we're doing a lot to help that.
But I think what's important here is that with these abortion bans, people won't have those choices anymore. Those choices will be made for them by the legislature. They'll be forced to continue pregnancies. They won't be able to make a choice about that. And unfortunately, I personally know people who have gone to places like Heartbeat International and other centers and have been counseled to remain in relationships with abusive partners as part of their tactic to try to convince people to continue pregnancies that they did not want to continue. It's important that people have all of the resources they need to make their own decisions, and that they are not being forced into continuing a pregnancy against their will, either because the law has said and mandated that, or because they have been guilted into it by organizations that have an agenda that's not necessarily aligned with the values of the person who visited their center.
So I'm going to try to combine two different questions that are somewhat related. Maria from Pataskala wants to know what will be the impact on the social service infrastructure for more children being born in Ohio, as far as like already foster care systems are strained, and you always have issues with schools and everything from every single aspect of our society depends on how many people we have, obviously. And also the other question comes from a reader who says, pro-life groups have said that they're going to step up and help mothers who have children that they don't want to have through this all. She wants to know, how long is that going to last? Is that going to last until the kid is in middle school or high school or going off to college? What is the commitment to these children going forward, and also who's going to pay for all this? That was a lot in one question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, let me jump in, because I've actually been itching to answer this question. Here's the reality about children and women in the state of Ohio. 1 in 5 children currently lives in poverty in the state. Not a coincidence. 1 in 5 women also lives in poverty in this state. We have 25,000 children who are currently at some point going through the foster care system here in Ohio. And Ohio has some of the worst, when I say the worst, the bottom 10 worst outcomes for children in the foster care system. It gets even worse if you are a Black or brown child, or if you live in Appalachia. And so the reality is that children and women are already not doing well in this state. And frankly, to hear that suddenly, these anti-abortion groups are going to step up and fight for women and children is frustrating, when the reality is for decades, Democrats have been fighting for things like paid family leave, for affordable childcare, for making sure that families have access to things like affordable diapers and affordable infant formula, pregnancy accommodations in the workplace, equal pay for women, all of these things that we know build and uplift women and children and families. And the reality is that those things have been severely underfunded, including our foster care system here in the state of Ohio. I sit on the finance committee and I've sat through hours of discussions about these systems. They are failing our children and our women. And to suddenly think that groups are going to come to the table and turn this ship around when literally we've had decades to do this, is extremely frustrating. And so I too want to know, what is the commitment? Because there is desperate need already, and this need is going to get worse as we continue to take away the fundamental freedoms of women and families to make decisions about whether or not to start a family.
Representative Russo, I can definitely speak to this. For one thing, if you were ever interested in doing anything regarding paid family leave, please reach out to me. This is actually the first thing I ever lobbied on. I actually lobbied on it federally. So if you're interested in doing anything in paid family leave, please reach out to me, because I'm really interested in digging into that, because I think that that's real. And I think that whenever we are talking about the needs of women and children in Ohio, there are always two things that run through my mind. Thing number one is our solution to poverty and the real crises that women and babies and children and young adults are facing in our state. Our solutions should not be violent. Our solution should not be killing that child before they're born. Our solution should not be advocating for that woman to undergo an abortion that could have underlying health and emotional issues later. The answer, I believe, truly is stepping up. And like I said, let's do it. Let's do paid family leave. Let's make that happen. And in terms of diapers and formula, I know that Cindy could speak to this extensively. The pregnancy centers were one of the few places left that had formula left during the formula shortage, because this is something they provide for free every day. And thankfully they had stockpiles. So when that need came up, they were ready to go. So I believe that when we're looking at the state of Ohio, the solution should never be, let's eliminate people. That will fix the problem. Let's look instead at say, hey, these problems are real. Like, we can't be in denial about the fact that Ohioans in Appalachia are at much higher risks for all kinds of issues surrounding poverty and social issues. Let's look at these things from a holistic perspective and not say that abortion is going to fix it. I believe that more Ohioans is a good thing, but I also believe that we have a responsibility to them. So if there's supportive legislation that you think you'd like to do, please don't hesitate to reach out, because I'm actually really excited about doing some of that stuff.
Well, those bills have been introduced for multiple general assemblies, so I welcome your advocacy for them, because they've been around for well over a decade at this point.
And I'll be honest, Representative Russo, I know this has been a hard push. I know that family leave has been difficult, but we live in times right now where this is the right move. This is the right call. The pro-life movement has said for decades, love them both. I believe that that is a promise. I believe that we do have to back that up. So if there's paid family leave legislation you would like to do, or something supportive, please don't hesitate to reach out to our office, because I would love to start some of those conversations.
I just want to add to the conversation, because what I think is missing is, I loved Leader Russo's comments about the legislation that has been put forward and how it has been blocked by Republicans. I also want to add to that, we've seen cuts to TANF and to SNAP programs. And so as you force these families to grow and to have children, mothers and people and parents are going to do what is necessary to feed those children, to take care of those children. But what we've seen through policy and budget cuts from Republicans often, and folks who are pushing forward this agenda, is they're harming families in the bottom line. And real people are going to suffer. And again, when we think about some of the language, a lot of the people who are going to be criminalized for not having access to these services, they are going to be lower income Ohioans. They are going to be Black and brown Ohioans. They are going to be children. And the ripple effects of what we're seeing is going to be damaging to families in the years to come. But I am really excited about groups who are fighting back, who are standing up, and who are moving the ball forward to protect women and children, based on what we've been seeing on the ground, the excitement and the energy to make sure people have an opportunity to access the healthcare that they need.
I would love to jump in if I could. The pregnancy help community, they haven't planned to do it. They are doing it. They are helping young couples. They are helping single moms. They're repairing cars. They're holding babies while mamas go to community classes to finish up their GED and their college education. They're reaching out and they're giving all kinds of supplies to them. They're mentoring them. They're life coaching them. They're helping them create a more positive future. And they are doing that right here in Ohio. So the pregnancy centers of Ohio are making Ohio better. They're helping young couples. They're helping single moms. They're helping them create a better future, a brighter future. And that's really what we're all about. And they are giving all kinds of supplies away. They're not finding a discount, they're giving them away for free. So pregnancy help centers bring things to the table, resources and supplies at the goodwill of each community. And that's a wonderful thing that's happening throughout the state of Ohio for women and children and families.
Now, Nancy, to that, I'm sorry, Cindy, the reader, Nancy, part of her question was, how long does that last? How long does that commitment last? Is that just when
Sure.
child
Honestly, pregnancy help centers will go a long distance with a young mom, with a young family that needs help. A lot of times what we find is they self-select when they want to be done. They find out they're at a point where they are thriving. And then they might reach out back to us occasionally. We help them then. It's one of those things where we don't have a definitive time of service. We have a caring arm, and we do whatever we can to assist them, whatever is feasible. And so that's the kind of help they're going to get long term. And we're also helping teach parenting classes. We're doing nutrition so children are healthy. We're doing all of those things long term. That way we're creating a healthier family unit, whether it's a single mom and her baby or two parents and a baby. We're really trying to make that long term connection so they feel supported and ready for life.
I think one thing that, Desiree, you did very well, and I want to circle back on, is putting the pregnant person at the center of the story. So we're hearing some about what happens to people who carry a pregnancy to term and they want help from a crisis pregnancy center, and they get it. But I want to remind the viewers of something that they know, but remind us all that people with all types of beliefs have abortions. Conservative women are not immune to contraceptive failure, illness of the fetus or the woman, or to rape. And many women of all kinds of beliefs and all kinds of socioeconomic status find that despite their belief against abortion, carrying a pregnancy to term is not something they can go through with. And so they have an abortion. And leaving that choice available to all people in the state of Ohio is strongly in the interest of those individual people's health and well-being, and in the public health interest of the state as a whole. As a public health advocate, I'm an advocate for science, and I'm an advocate for the health and well-being of the people of Ohio. I take it back to the people at the center of the story, and such important decisions about the rest of their lives is best left in the hands of every person who is pregnant to decide what they're going to do about their pregnancy.
If we could just for 1 second talk about sex education. Roger Stevenson of Hillard says that I don't feel like we have an abortion problem, but we have an unwanted pregnancy problem. Can the panelists discuss early sex ed?
Well, I would point out that Ohio continues to be the only state in the country that does not have standards for health education, which includes sex ed in our schools. And, we know that when young adults are armed with evidence-based education, that, they are better informed and often, sometimes make better decisions, and we see lower rates of unplanned pregnancy. And again, here in the State House, we continue to see efforts to push back on just creating standards for evidence-informed education. We also know that this is important in protecting children from sexual abuse. In fact, we've got bipartisan legislation right now that is aimed at, in an appropriate way, arming children with the information they need to know to protect themselves from abusers. And we get pushback on that legislation. So all of these things have very detrimental results, not only for children and students, but also, we also see it reflected in the rates of unplanned pregnancy and teen pregnancy.
Yeah, I would just note on that issue, the minority leaders, right, that Ohio doesn't have standards on health in general. And a Republican senator, former Senator Peggy Lehner, said there's so much that we're not dealing with health that's being ignored because we seem can't seem to figure out how to talk to kids about sex. And so that has been an issue in Ohio for several years now, just figuring out how to talk to children about sex education and at what age that's appropriate has become a really partisan issue here.
I would note that a lot of crisis pregnancy centers in Ohio also teach abstinence-only education and get funding to do that. So, people who get abstinence-only education and don't get information about comprehensive sex education and other age-appropriate information about how to protect themselves from sexually transmitted infections, unintended pregnancy, and of course, as Rep. Russo talked about, unwanted sexual contact from people are left vulnerable. And that's one of the reasons why we have a lot of concerns about taxpayer dollars going to these organizations that are not regulated, that do not have to follow HIPAA regulations when people enter their facilities, and who also go into our schools and provide abstinence-only sex education, which is not effective and it's not evidence-based.
Cindy or Allie, do you want to add anything about sex ed?
I can hop in real quick. So I know that sex ed can be kind of an intense conversation because sex in and of itself is just an intense conversation. But I do believe that children do need to have a better understanding of their bodies. And I think any sex ed that is done needs to be done in that vein. I think one of the big issues we have right now in terms of this generation is I don't think this generation understands who they are. And I don't think they have a strong enough understanding of how valued they are and how important they are and how they deserve to have someone who's going to be committed to them. They deserve to have someone who's going to treat them well, who's going to, protect those lines of consent with them, who isn't going to push them, right? I believe one of the other panelists mentioned that, sex ed, they wanted to have sex ed that was going to also protect children to kind of know when a situation is getting dangerous and when a situation needs to be backed from. So I think that there are different routes to sex ed. I think that there's a wide variety of people who see different kind of routes to helping give kids the tools that they need to be safe. But I 100% agree that kids need to know that they have a right to be safe. I know that there are some different organizations like Teen Femme that focus especially on kind of the female aspects of sexuality and the female aspects of kind of how our bodies work and understanding them, not demonizing the changes that happen when a young girl is, moving into this new stage of her life, but teaching her that her body has value. That she's respected, that she can demand a lot of someone else who is going to be in a relationship with her, which I think is good. So I think these conversations are important to have. I think that they are complicated, but I truly do believe that kids do deserve to be safe.
And I would circle back on that and say that, Elizabeth Smart, as many of us remember, had been abducted and subjected to terrible sexual violence. She had only had abstinence-only sex education, which unfortunately often includes very stigmatizing messaging about so-called purity and things like that made her feel like she wasn't worth coming forward after she had been violated in that way. That is why we strongly support comprehensive, age-appropriate sex education that teaches people about responsible decision-making, about self-worth, and about that does not include stigmatizing information about purity and other things that unfortunately so often come along with the abstinence-only programs that we see taught by crisis pregnancy centers and other anti-abortion organizations that work their way into schools.
Kelly, I'll follow up just super fast because I know that everyone wants a chance to speak. I can speak to this a little bit personally. I grew up more on the side of having to deal with some repercussions of purity culture. It is very damaging, but it is not the same as sex education that is comprehensive. I think those things are not mutually exclusive, I think that purity culture is not safe. I think it's dangerous, to be frank, and I've experienced it to some degree myself. But I do believe that comprehensive, frank discussions about bodily functions and the worth of individuals can be done in a good context without swinging to the extreme of a purity culture conversation. So I have experienced some of those sex conversations that are not purity culture, but are based in the dignity of the human person. And those things are not mutually exclusive. And to be honest, in terms of the way that sex ed is being written now, coming from that perspective, it is much more focused on seeing sex as a thing that is incredible, that is wonderful, that is to be approached with reverence, of course, but as a positive in the human experience. So I do think those two things should be differentiated just from my personal experience.
Okay, so I want to try to get one question in about religious freedom. This comes from Rabbi Rick Keltner from Columbus area. He says Jewish tradition, as well as other faiths, have laws that require abortion in certain incidents. Jewish law states that the life of a mother takes precedence over the life of a fetus. In what way does Ohio current abortion law violate religious freedom?
Thanks for raising that, Amelia. The explanation that Jewish law puts the life of a pregnant person over the life of the fetus is something that a lot of Ohioans feel. Jewish Ohioans and Ohioans who are from every faith strongly feel that the life of a person, a woman or a child who is walking around holds value, tremendous value, and no other value should be put in front of that. A potential value should not be put in front of that. And so thanks for raising that. I think that speaks broadly to the religious freedoms, the religious beliefs, the ethical beliefs of the majority of people in the state. And across the state, there's really a lot of complex nuance in how people think about abortion. 53% are very supportive. 30% have mixed feelings, 17 are unsupportive of abortion. That's a really nuanced environment. And the law that we have in front of us now is not nuanced. It represents a very far, small, narrow piece of the beliefs about abortion in Ohio. So the law is not in accordance with the vast, complex nuance and rich lived experiences of the people in the state.
I just want to add that religious freedoms is something that was really coded in our founding fathers. We're just coming off of July 4th, Independence Day, and we're talking about our freedom as a country. And what we saw in Dobbs from the Supreme Court, far right majority in that opinion, is they are not honoring the separation of church and state. And so this is happening at a level that is really alarming. And so we're not just talking about, I'm Christian, but I'm not going to impose my Christian beliefs on everyone on this panel. I believe in the separation of church and state. That's why we have the Constitution. That's why the document is so sacred and really honored and followed to a T up until, this year when we saw the Supreme Court backtrack on some of the principles of our founding fathers. And so religious freedoms and the separation of church and state is at risk right now because of Dobbs and because of some of the things we saw in Justice Thomas's concurring opinion, where he's like, go after everything, attack everything. And so we are at a moment where we need to really think about our beliefs and how that folds into the Constitution and what we want to see from our lawmakers and the legislation that will come in the future in terms of the separation of church and state, because I believe it's so core and so critical to our democracy.
And just real quickly, because I know that we're wrapping up here, but the freedom to not be killed does come before religious freedom. And when we're looking at the issue of abortion, the question is always, what is abortion and what does it do to babies and to women? And over 90% of biologists agree that life begins at conception, which means that abortion ends a distinct human life that has worth, that has value, And if given the right time, will become a person who will then be born and will contribute to society, and will have value simply because they are human. So I think that when we're talking about religious freedom, we need to realize that even religious freedom has caveats. My religious freedom doesn't allow me to go and hurt someone horribly. Religious freedom is within the bounds of the rights we have as Americans, both of faith and not of faith, to live free of violence. And I think that that is always an important conversation to have when we're talking about the connection between abortion and religion, is that religion does not give us the right to end distinct human lives.
Yeah, I just want to push back, in terms of where life begins, because even the groups on the far right agree that, or at least from what I've heard today, that in the case of an ectopic pregnancy, actually the woman's life is important, it is prioritized, or at least that's what was conveyed. But I also want to amplify a story that came out of Dayton about a woman who was diagnosed with cancer and needed to get chemotherapy. She was then forced to travel to Indiana or another state to get that treatment. And so what we're seeing from the groups and from the language, as someone who studied law, is that language matters, words matter. And so we have to be very careful about the language that we, underscore and enact in legislation, and how it really impacts people's real lives and the decisions that are going on in hospitals and between the patient and the doctor.
Absolutely. And I would definitely recommend anyone who is curious about the differences between abortion and an ectopic pregnancy, please, if you have a chance, read the Ohio Code on it. I'm more than happy to send it in to anyone if they want to reach out to me. I can be reached through our website, rightslaveofnortheastohio.com. I would love to clarify the difference between an ectopic pregnancy and an abortion, because the pro-life movement believes that every life is valuable, and that includes both the child in the womb and the woman. And so our goal in every piece of legislation is always, how do we protect life, protect moms, protect babies, and create a culture of life? So if anybody ever has a question about any ectopic pregnancy language in current law, please don't hesitate to reach out.
And I would jump in on that and say that whether we're talking about religious freedom or medical decisions, they should be made by the people who are most impacted, the person who is pregnant and the physician that is treating them, not by a piece of paper that's sitting on Allie's desk or some other politician's desk. In the end, it is about the person who will have to live with it, the person who is experiencing it, and not somebody who's never met them and will not have to live with what happens next. It's about who decides. Do you think that the government should decide, or do you think that you should decide? I think you should decide.
Okay, well, I'm going to jump in this time and say that I really thank you guys all for joining us for this important conversation. We can go on for another hour probably talking about this very important topic. I didn't get to as many reader questions as I wanted to, but I'm going to turn those over to our news department to see if they can find more information for folks. So once again, thank you for joining us. I want to thank our producer, Joe Harrington, who is behind the scenes tonight helping out. I want to thank Dr. Allison Norris, Kelly Copeland, Desiree Timms, Allie Frazier, Allison Russo, Jesse Balmer, and Cindy Boston. So thank you so much. And the next community conversation we have for as part of the series is going to be live in August. So be sure to watch out for more information about that. You guys have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Amelia.
Thanks, Amelia. Bye.